Yeah. Yeah, it's done. All right, cool. All right. Yeah, I think we can go ahead and get started. And yeah, without further ado, I'd like to call upon the Prime Minister. Here.
Am I audible?
You are.
Three, two, one, go. The decentralization of healthcare will increase access and improve diagnoses. At the same time, it will mean that minor conditions such as the flu can be treated off state healthcare and off private healthcare, meaning they can be done more efficiently. At the same time, as well, major healthcare conditions are now more likely to go to the doctor because you find out about these things in advance. A few things in this speech, then. But the first thing I actually want to start with is some framing over why it is the case that it's not likely that like very harmful drugs are going to start being given over the counter, and when drugs are given over the counter aren't given already, or when advice is given online, or when any of these things in the motion happen, it is likely to be done with warnings saying you should go to the doctor if you're unsure, and you should be careful over these things. And they are likely to be explained well. Three reasons why. One, because drugs companies don't want to get sued. Note that even in this world, if they give the wrong information about these things, they're still likely to be sued for giving the wrong information. They're likely to be sued very heavily for giving people incorrect information that severely harmed their health. Note that at the same time as well, it's likely that there be reputational damage to these drugs companies, and they're not likely to do it for those reasons. Secondly, no society is likely to give out severely harmful drugs, such as like opioids, because these things are likely to cause addictions because of other problems in society. The governments are not likely to allow the most extremes. But thirdly, note that even as an individual, you self-regulate to a large extent. Note that if you don't have a serious condition, you're not likely to want to take serious drugs for it because you know you could potentially harm your body. Most people are adverse to taking drugs to some extent because of the fact they don't want to harm their body and don't want to make themselves ill as a result of this. So most people, if anything, are cautious about drugs and self-regulate in that regard. Okay, first thing in this speech then, why is it the case that under the status quo, many people don't have access to drugs? There's two broad categories of reasons here. Firstly, just a lot of people are structurally locked out of it completely. They cannot afford healthcare because many states in the world don't offer state healthcare. Often the state healthcare services are relatively weak throughout most of the world because lobbying from drugs companies, because of lobbying from doctors' unions, etc., to reduce healthcare in that country. And just simply many countries cannot afford to have state healthcare be extensively delivered. But secondly, even in the developed world, many people also still can't afford healthcare, or still afford healthcare in like states such as the US. But even when they can afford it, often they don't go just because it takes a lot of time, it's expensive still to pay for. Even if you have a complete state healthcare system, often you don't want to go because you don't want to feel like you're a burden on the state, or you just don't want to feel like you're a burden in general. The reason why a lot of men, for example, don't go to healthcare. Thirdly, as well, on top of this, you also as well don't want to make yourself. You don't often think an illness will happen to you because it's never happened to you before, or at least not a serious illness. So you don't expect it to happen, and therefore you don't go to the doctors in the first place. This now solves this now. Briefly, it means it just gives greater access to healthcare to those who can't afford it. But even those who may not want to go to healthcare because of a personal decision that they don't feel they want to go, they're still now more knowledgeable of healthcare and are more likely to look online, more likely to try to treat themselves, and more likely to understand the conditions that they have when they have symptoms of conditions arising. Note, this means a few things. If it is a milder condition that they have, such as the flu, it is likely that they're going to know that this is a milder condition, and this simply just saves money that the state would otherwise be spending. Note that the conditions of the flu cost huge amounts in terms of healthcare for both the state and private healthcare systems, and often clog up bed space, etc., often clog up doctor's appointments because these things are relatively mild, and the doctors can't do much for them anyway, other than tell you to take prescription medicine. Now people are more aware of this and more looking online at these conditions. They're more likely to be aware that this is a mild condition that they have and try the flu medicine in advance before going to the doctor. This saves money. It also raises support for state healthcare in countries that don't already have it because state healthcare no longer costs as much because it's not being clogged up by these sort of people flus. Note that you are likely to know it's a mild condition that you have and not be confused with a severe condition. One, because of the difference in severity of the symptoms, but two, even if you take the flu medicine and it doesn't work, then you know you have a more severe condition and you know this is a more major condition that you do need to see the doctors about. Okay, second thing then is if you do have a more serious or complex condition, you are likely to still see the doctors. Note, this is not like you're treated by the simple over-the-counter medicine or the flu medicine. And note, now you're more aware of the conditions that you have, you're more likely to go to the doctors. As in, if there is a financial barrier in place, you're more likely to realize this is a severe condition that you have, and therefore that even the little money that you have is worth spending on medicine. Or if you're one of these people who just simply has access to healthcare but doesn't go because of the fact they don't feel like a burden on the state, etc. Note my analysis at the beginning that many people have access to healthcare still don't go. If you're one of these people and you have a complex condition, you're now more likely to go because now you're more aware of the illness that you have because you've already looked into it and you've already seen that it must be a serious condition because the basic medicine hasn't treated it. This just means that more people with serious conditions actually go to the doctors and go to the doctors earlier than they otherwise would before the symptoms actually get severe and these conditions cannot be treated. I'll take a PY from CO before moving on.
Yeah, why not just go to the doctor straight away when they are suffering something?
Look, I gave you this analysis at the beginning. One, a lot of people just don't have access because of money. But secondly, lots of people don't go to the doctor straight away because they don't feel like a burden on the state. They can't imagine an illness happening to them. Note even more analysis I gave you at the beginning. Okay, so yeah. Okay, yeah. Note a few more things in this speech then. Firstly, this is actually just means that you just get better diagnoses and more accurate diagnoses as well, because now people understand medicine more. So by the time they go to the doctors, they've already read about it online and already understand the condition more. They've already thought through their symptoms. Often when people describe to the doctors their symptoms, it is miscommunicated to the doctors because they do not know how to describe them properly. They do not understand what symptoms they have, and they haven't thought about it deeply enough. Now these problems are solved because you've thought about these even before you've gone to the doctors, and you've been introspective about it, and you just know the medical terms, etc., to describe it, so you get better diagnoses for that. But second thing I want to note as well, it's a lot of people that do this under the status quo. The sort of people who go to homeopathy, the sort of people who buy into pseudoscience that's sold to them because other people want to make profit, the sort of people that buy into conspiracy theories. Note that these people still exist on both sides of the debate because they already exist under the status quo. The difference is now these people are better educated than they are on their side of the house, because now these people are actually part of the norm. And these people simply read about the things online now, read about this health journalism, read about the health education, and actually get a quality source of information on it. So even if they believe in these things, they are less bad. So they don't turn to homeopathy because they've read in these medical journalist articles the homeopathy is nonsense. What they do instead is they actually take the proper over-the-counter medicine, and then are more likely to actually trust the doctors and go to the doctors because they see this as a viable option. Because they've read about like doctors online. Note, like, we take this debate because we take this debate because the more minor conditions get sorted better, like vote opening government.
All right, I'd like to thank that speaker for what was a very fine speech, and now I'd like to call upon the Leader of the Opposition. You're here.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Thank you. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. On the opening opposition, we would like to tell you that what happens after we increase the decentralization of healthcare and why that is harmful, and on the counterfactual, how we are going to actually be better for the whole society, for everyone's healthcare. So firstly, we would like to tell you that actually in the society, people usually, we oftentimes lack the actual professional medical knowledge to make the right diagnosis for ourselves on ourselves. Although the government side might try to tell you that you can gain more knowledge, you can read a lot of things about this, but we tell you that no matter how much you read online or other resources, it is not going to be the same as reality, because these medical knowledge are not established fact. You can't just see some symptoms and then try to make a conclusion of what you actually have, because you could also have other illnesses at the same time, and therefore it could actually lead to something different. So we don't think that reading gaining those facts and knowledge online is going to be enough to treat yourself. And what's worse is that once you get a few times of self-treatment that actually works, you might gain the false confidence that you could treat yourself or even treat your family or try to affect other people's decision in going for a healthcare, and that is actually more harmful because even if it worked for 1 or 2 times doesn't mean that you're always going to make the right decision. Not even professional doctors could do that, so we don't think that it is reliable for people to make all those decisions. And also we think that decentralizing healthcare could actually lead to people going to other authorities or being affected by other authorities. Like I mentioned, your family or your friends could try to tell you how to treat yourself because this is the trend that is going on in the society. That means that also like influencers or YouTubers would try to give, like, even if it's correct, it's only some basic and basic knowledge about it. And they have these influencers also have the other incentives, like to get more streams and more notice from people, so they could be exaggerating things or they don't have the incentive to actually give the right helpful treatment to everyone. So this could be another harmful source that people would try to go for once we decentralize the healthcare. And nextly, we'll move on to how this is actually going to lower the accessibility to healthcare and why that is harmful. Because now we see that the social narrative is that people is afraid of wasting the healthcare resources. They are unlikely to go to a decent doctor if they feel like they're sick. And that also means that people would probably choose to go to a pharmacy nearby and just get whatever medicine was recommended. That means that because these pharmacies usually have the incentive to profit, so that means that they could offer like only medicines that is helpful in short term. Although OG tell you that they will be afraid to be sued, we tell you that they could try to give you less effective medicines that is really hard for you to call out. It might be helpful in the short term, but you could later on fall into the trap and be charged highly by these pharmacy, and that is going to be even harder for people to get a better healthcare in the future. And I'll take one POI from CG.
In the absence of health journalism, where exactly are people getting all of their health information?
We believe that they will. We believe that we still have resources for people to get knowledge from. People are still going to get medical knowledge from other resources, but that is not going to be what they're solely relying on, and they will also still be willing to go to other healthcare services. And moving back to my arguments, having the social narrative that people are unwilling to go to healthcare and being afraid of wasting these healthcare resources also means that these governments are later on going to have less incentive to sustain a better medical system, because now that people just are not willing to go to these healthcare centers and they think that they can self-diagnose and treat themselves, that means that people might be less relying on these public healthcare system, and that means that the government or like the Congress are less likely going to push for a better quality and better resource for all people. And like health insurance that is helping a lot of poor people nowadays could be canceled or could be lower in the future, and that could be really harmful for poor people who are relying on these resources now. And we think that that in the long term is going to be really harmful when people actually need and when people actually have a more severe condition. And we think that lastly, it's going to be really harmful regarding mental illness, because what I've already told you is that the social narrative now is that people could be scared to be called out because of wasting medical resources. Like people would have the idea of you have to be like severe to a certain standard to actually go to that you are qualified to go to a healthcare center. That means that for mental illness, it is really hard to measure at the very first place, and people it's usually hard to diagnose that just by yourself, and it is usually depends on a really professional diagnosis. So we think that it is going to be very harmful if people with mental illness start to question themselves and feel like they are not, it might not be severe enough to go to a healthcare center, or they are just afraid of being called out by the society. So we think that not just mild symptoms that are hard to tell and hard to measure could also be a severe question in the severe problem in the society that will happen after we increase the decentralization of healthcare, and that is why we're proud to oppose.
All right, I'd like to thank that speaker for what was a very fine speech, and now I'd like to call upon the DPM. You're here.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. 1 second, let me get my notes ready. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I think OO never really responds to all of Matt's mechanisms in terms of like why, like, you know, how it changes for short-term diagnosis as well as long-term diagnosis. I'll be doing 3 things in my speech today. Firstly, I'll just be clarifying what exactly happens when you decentralize healthcare. Secondly, I'll be explaining the impacts on like short-term health conditions, but thirdly, on like long-term health conditions as well as the healthcare system as a whole. Firstly, let's just talk about like what changes when like, you know, this decentralization of healthcare, right? I think firstly, you just get like more health journals, and like more health journals that are more geared towards like the average like person, right? Why is this true? I think firstly, like insofar as like governments as well as hospitals see that there's like a trend towards people going online to get information, that's an incentive, because like they want to make sure that people are getting accurate information, that, you know, they won't do anything that can actually actively harm themselves and their health, right? This means they're probably going to have like more hospitals putting out blogs in terms of like, oh, this is like common knee issues that people face, or oh, this is like what happens, like what possible issues when you have like maybe back pain, for example, right? I think a few things to note here. One, it's far more likely that these, like, insofar as you know that these websites are supposed to be geared towards the average person, they're much more likely to be readable. Why is this true? One, I think it's just an understanding that like these, like the average person doesn't have like the specialized medical knowledge that like most doctors have. But two, I think like as compared to just like a doctor engaging with you within a clinic, right? What's different here is that you have probably the blog being written by one, a doctor, but also two, like someone who has like some kind of communication degree that actually understands how to word things properly so that people can actually understand this, right? But I think secondly, you have things like more email the doctor blogs, i.e. these are official like blogs that actually allow readers to actually send in like possible concerns they have, right? I think it's just a few things. One, I think like for people who don't actually see themselves being represented within like the pre-existing blogs, they're much more, they have this avenue to actually like seek information, right? And I think like this is especially true for maybe like minorities, or like for example, because like I think medicine is in the status quo is oftentimes based on like knowledge that is from like testing on like a white average man, right? I think this means that like oftentimes things like skin cancer, for example, can manifest very differently from within people who have like maybe different skin color. Insofar as you now have like more of these blogs because people are increasingly turning towards like the internet, this means you have far more like higher like likelihood of, you know, these things being discussed, especially for like minority medical issues. But thirdly, I think you just have things like more pharmacies pop up that actually have pharmacists on hand to actually help people do over-the-counter medicine and like guide them appropriately, right? I think this is just true because like, for example, Boots or like the local pharmacy, you probably have an incentive to like, they see this as a way to earn money. They probably want to actually do these things. So it's like over-the-counter medicine isn't like completely, you know, unregulated and whatnot, as like Matt tells you. But thirdly, I think it's the narrative that actually exists, right? I think the government's likely to tell you that medicine is like a partnership between like the doctor and yourself, that you as an individual do have some agency and do need to take responsibility for your own health in terms of like being aware of like how your own body feels, as well as like spotting symptoms when they do arise, right? But I think secondly, but I think at the same time, they'll still probably tell you that like you probably don't have the same amount of knowledge as a doctor who has like studied 5 years, and this means that you probably will still go to the doctor if it's like a significant medical condition. Knowing this then, how does this affect like short-term medical issues, right? I think Matt gives you like many mechanisms as to how this actually increases accessibility, especially for like non-serious like short-term issues like the flu, right? I think OO's response to this was that oh, no matter how much you learn online, you just won't make any diagnosis. I think firstly, just to compare what happens in the status quo, right? If you actually, like, Matt tells you that most people won't go to the doctor anyways, this means they probably won't get access to a lot of medicine, right? But I think, like, even if they do go, what happens then is that doctors can't really help, because oftentimes in medicine, you're taught the principle of like increasing severity, i.e. if they come to you for the first time, you take the most least aggressive treatment plan that you actually can take, right? And this means doing things like giving the least strongest medicine, or just telling them to wait it out or rest and see how actually helps, right? This means that you probably don't get much help in the first place, which means that even if you don't go to the doctor, you're much more likely to save time and money by just going to the pharmacist to get some kind of flu medicine, right? But then even if you can't fully learn and understand what's happening, right? Let's just take the best case and worst case on our side. The best case is it's a minor issue, it gets fixed over time because you know your body best, and this means that you probably know that this is just a flu, I can probably wait this out, or this is a cold that this is my allergy acting up and whatnot. Even in the worst case, where it's actually a serious issue and you don't have the full understanding to know this, I think Matt gives you analysis and which they completely ignore in terms of how people are likely to, if symptoms persist for especially a long period of time, which is indicative of chronic medical issues, right? And much more likely, they're still likely to go to the doctors anyway. We don't see how this actually changes or makes things different. I think then also just dealing with the whole point about false confidence and how you actually get information from YouTubers and whatnot. I think we just deal with this insofar as most people have some degree of internet searching skills, Google's algorithm will put official sources first. This means that you're much more likely to click on the first source, which is probably a reliable medical website. But two, you're probably told from in school that you shouldn't click on some .com website. You should go for for example a .health website or reliable sources, right? This means that I don't really see how this actually makes any difference. But then what about long-term conditions, right? I think this is a few things that changes here. Sorry, let me find it. Okay, one, I think you're just much more likely to seek and as well as get help for these medical issues, right? But before I continue, I'll get a POI from closing.
What is the propensity for these normal individuals to constantly keep up with medical advancements?
Look, they don't have to. What happens is that if they feel like they're falling ill or whatnot, they can probably Google it. And these blogs aren't gonna say this is you can fix this miraculously. It's gonna be these are the common conditions. If, for example, if it persists for over a long period of time, go and see the doctor. They access it when they need to. Information is probably well classified anyways. But how about bigger issues, right? Moving back to the point here, I think one, just recognize you're much more likely to get help for bigger issues insofar as you're much more aware of medical issues and terminologies because these websites are more accessible, and this means that it's less daunting to actually access these medical terms, right? But two, I think you actually receive help in time. This is why I impact Matt's point about how you decrease the load on healthcare systems, right? Because oftentimes people who have serious illnesses don't actually get the help they need because one, it takes ages for them to get a CT scan to actually get a diagnosis that they need to actually receive treatment because they can't start treatment if they're not diagnosed. But two, actually receive treatment because there's oftentimes a backlog in terms of when you can actually start your treatment. And this means that especially for serious illnesses like cancer, this can actually worsen the prognosis and the ability to actually survive that condition, right? I think at the end of the day, what this means is that on our side, we actually have better short-term healthcare, long-term healthcare, and just better healthcare as a whole, and therefore OG.
All right, I'd like to thank that speaker for what was a very fine speech. And now I'd like to call upon the DLO. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep, you are.
All right, give me a second. I prefer audible POIs, but I'm probably going to take one around 4 or 5. Starting in 3, 2, 1, go. I think opening government's case is very unintuitive, precisely because they're basically trying to circumvent all opposition attacks by just saying that at the end of the day, you're still going to go to the doctor. I think even if we take them at their best, opening opposition takes down this by several ways. Firstly, we prove to you how people have wrong diagnosis in the first place. Therefore, even if you go to a doctor, you probably just go to the wrong doctor, right? But we think in vast majority of cases, you're probably not going to go to the doctor anyway, because you believe that you have successfully diagnosed something. Precisely, if we believe in opening government's mechanism of how people believe that they have very good internet searching skill, then even if their condition is not fully solved, they might not feel that much urge to actually go to the doctor and therefore delay the treatment. But the second and more important thing that we prove to you is on the accessibility of healthcare, both in terms of supply and in terms of demand. Why is that important? Because if we can prove to you that individuals are like more likely going to be prevented from going to the doctor in the first place on our side, but also the medication that they can access is just severely weaker, then even if we take OG at their best, that individuals are ultimately still going to the doctor, the treatment they get is going to be worse. So basically, these are the two things I'm going to talk about in my class. Rebuttals will be integrated. On to the first thing about accessibility. What did we tell you? We told you firstly, in terms of demand, individuals are likely going to be prevented from seeking medication. This is important because I think on the weighing of vulnerable people, we proved to you that the most vulnerable people in society, for example, the poor people, are more likely going to be give themselves, for example, excuse from seeking medication in the first place. I think, of course, a government attack is like poor people probably cannot use healthcare. Anyway, this is also going to be resolved in my second class about how we increase in the supply for medication. But also, I think the point is that most poor people, at least the poor people who are in the delta of this debate, have some capacity to go to the doctor. The difference is that on government side, they are just not willing to go to the doctor in the first place if they feel like they shouldn't have wasted this money because they are supposed to be able to utilize their information and just solve the problem in of itself. The problem is, firstly, I don't think poor people, especially poor people, I don't think it's easy for them to access the necessary information in order for them to even understand the correct information online and therefore make a right diagnosis. Second, even if they make the right diagnosis, they still need to go to the pharmacy to get some medicine, for example. So I don't think they can achieve that on government side. But the second thing that we told you, which is more important and never engaged with, is how people with mental illness, people with the perceived illness that is not as severe that opening government wants to suggest, now are even prevented from going to the doctors in the first place. Because, for example, if you have mental illness, if you just feel sad, if you just feel depressed, it's very difficult for society to actively see it. And therefore, if you go to the if you go to doctors, for example, on government side, what people are going to do is they're going to say that you're wasting resources because their argument is literally how you should free up resources and people with mild disease now will not go. You are preventing these people with mild disease, which you are not even sure whether it's mild disease or not, from going. Why is that bad? Because firstly, we went on the vulnerable people clash. But second, I think this also directly responds to their idea about freeing up resources. I want to note that on both sides, people with really mild disease, for example, if I just have a cold and most people understand what a cold is, are probably not going to go to medication anyway, precisely because the opening government already conceded that medication is a bit expensive in many places. And therefore, I don't think there's going to be a lot of clog of resources on our side. But I think their argument is also very far-fetched when they just say that because people will not seek medication, therefore healthcare will be a lot cheaper on their side. Like states have incentive to provide healthcare. I think this is unintuitive because what we told you in terms of supply is firstly, states just don't have the incentive to provide centralized healthcare, to build up hospitals, for example, even if the cost is lower, if it doesn't become a very pressing voter issue, if states can easily dismiss people by saying that you should just Google more online, or I can post more information online, it means that they don't have enough incentive to do so. But second, aside from states, I think also many healthcare insurances, for example, are being provided by insurance companies. They also don't have the incentive on government side to do this because they just, for example, think that it's a lot easier for them to just sell niche drugs or to sell other kinds of drugs. People are not willing to go to the doctor anyway. In the case of very serious illnesses, I think this is probably symmetric on both sides, that these people are still going to seek medication. And this is taking government at their best. But the difference is that on opposition side, we're able to get healthcare cheaper, or at least we increase in the possibility for states to provide healthcare insurances, for example, when there are more healthcare insurance company actually opt into the game, and reducing the overall healthcare cost by increasing in competition. The second thing I want to talk about here under accessibility is we told you how pharmacy drugs are bad on their side. They say that people are probably not going to want to harm themselves and therefore not going to buy opiate. 3 points of responses to this. Firstly, I think as we proved to you, people are likely going to have wrong diagnosis or wrong information, for example. So they just don't know that this drug is going to harm them in the first place. But second, I think very likely the drugs are not necessarily opiate. It's just ineffective. For example, it only helps you within a month or 2 months, for example. Pharmaceuticals have active incentive to do so because they can make more money. They can hook you up and constantly go buy their drugs. The counterfactual is on opposition side. The doctors will directly tell you that you should not buy those kinds of drugs, for example, because they have this specific information. But the third thing is, I think on government side, like you are like probably the providers are probably gonna not actually like thinking about people's benefit in the first place. So I think on our side, it's more likely on their side, it's more likely that these pharmaceuticals will sell not only ineffective drugs but also unnecessary drugs. For example, drugs that just help you lose weight, so drugs that help you, for example, reduce your acne, which I think probably causes more clog of like healthcare on government side. Before I move on, I'll take a POI.
The reason why people are going to fall to addiction and why Big Pharma has ruined hundreds of thousands of lives is because the only source of information is a doctor on your side. We correct that informational asymmetry by giving them other forms of information as well.
Okay, so onto the point about information. I want to make clear the counterfactual on our side is not that you have no information. I think according to government incentive that people cannot always go to the doctor anyway, and you might still want to understand what happens to you. I think there's still going to be information on our side. The delta is in how people treat this information. So I think on our side, people will still have some understanding of, for example, what disease there might be in the status quo. The difference is that they're going to go to the doctor. If closing government wants to prove that doctors are the ones that are actively putting you into the pharmaceuticals, actively pushing you into buying harmful drugs, for example, I think they will have to give structural reasons on this. But secondly, I also think that at least they have the information or they have the capacity to prevent this from happening. If they have perverse incentives to strengthen this from happening, then I think it's basically on both sides, because on government side, the comparative is that individuals are making their own decisions and they're likely going to appeal to wrong authority. And this leads me to the last point about why you have wrong diagnosis, right? Where we told you that if you just follow influencers, which is very likely going to happen, because on our side, the most popular searches that opening government wants to talk about probably going to be the ones that are generalized, that are not very specific. I think all the harms on government side will exist. They have to concede it. Proud to propose.
All right, I'd like to thank the speaker for what was a very fine speech, and now I'd like to open up the formal half of this debate and call upon the government member. You're here.
Hi, am I audible and visible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, cool. Hi, my name is Jadon. He, him pronouns. I'll take a POI from opening for engagement at around the 5th or 6th minute. I'll cue you for one, so don't worry. And so just please bear one POI. If opening doesn't give me one, then I would also take one from closing, I guess. Okay. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. For far too long have minorities been neglected by medicine, and for far too long have we let Big Pharma abuse the victims of society, those who are vulnerable, those who are sick. What has the debate materialized into so far, right? Does it talk about information, whether information exists on government, on opposition or not? We say yes, sure, information exists. We're not going to contest that. The fact, we are contesting the fact of where this information comes from. We tell you on their side, there's only going to be one source. And the source of information are also the people who are making profit of drugs. And that's where our case lies, right? We're going to have peer review systems of multiple different sources of valid information that will come later in my case. And that's how we'll win, right? But first, let's talk about what this debate actually looks like. What happens right now? Panel, this isn't a retrospective debate. This debate happens now going forward. This means since a big majority of us have only dealt with doctors our entire lives, most of us are going to trust doctors anyways. This means that saying, people won't come to doctors at the end of the day, that's just not true. We just, on our side, it just looks like people being more wary, more aware that these doctors may have incentives to overcharge them with different medications, and we give them the ability to resist, to be aware of that as they go to see the doctor. We also tell you that let's just frame out a bit of these things about people taking risky meditation, people opting to homeopathy, taking risky funguses and stuff. We tell you this just doesn't happen because this is a debate going forward. We tell you that by virtue of that, people just trust modern medicine, and this makes them better able to distinguish between what is fake homeopathy or their own home treatments, and are still going to go to clinics to get actual medication from that. We simply, the trade-off here is simple, right? It's just fringe, irrational people and inaccurate information that we'll deal with later on for impartial medication and minorities getting better healthcare in general. What did OG tell you? Really quickly, they say that people are unaware of information, there's no information there. I think we can take them just for being more charitable and say information does exist on our side, but we deal with the crux of this debate because their biggest contribution to this is that now people who didn't go to clinics will now go because they have more information. This doesn't deal with why centralization actively harms minorities and further exploits sick people, and that's my argument. First argument then, about how medicine has left out minorities. Why is this important? They're the most vulnerable stakeholders in this debate, right? They often lack money. They suffer from sicknesses because they're unaware and they're untreated enough, and they have less money. Yeah, sorry. And there's less doctors available to these people, especially if they live in these poorer nations, right? The framing here is simple. Medical education uses like largely majoritarian approach, and they also reference a lot of like white people because that's where medicine is derived from. This causes three problems in the modern day. First, we tell this leads to a lack of expertise for doctors to treat minorities. Second, we tell there's a huge financial cost leading to information failure. And third, this deals with the average person who isn't sick but is now like subjected to body shaming. I'll explain why. The simple fact is this. Education, medical education is based off white people. This means that all sicknesses, symptoms, doctors are like learn to identify these through the lens of a white person's body. This means that often like people of other skin colors, black people, Hispanic people, even like a Chinese person will be subject to not having the same treatment because doctors just don't have that expertise. The three harms manifest in this way. Day-to-day body shaming. We tell that certain cultures and certain people have just adapted differently by virtue of being in different parts of the world. What happens now is that these people are subject to a BMI that isn't natural for them because bodies are simply built different. It caters to the average white person, sure, but certainly not people who live across the continents who have different climates who are now subject to body shaming even if they're not sick. But more crucially, we tell you that this leads to neglect and worst case abuse for minorities, right? We tell that people just don't get fair treatment. When black people go to place, it's scientifically proven that they are neglected because doctors are unaware that they're unaware of like the different symptoms, why it looks like skin tumors, diseases, how different diseases looks on different skin colors. They are just neglected. And this isn't just doctors not being benevolent, they're just unaware because that's the virtue of having only one source of information that comes from it, one source of information training all the doctors in the world. Financial costs leading to information failure. We tell you this just looks like people not wanting to go to the doctors for minor cases that could become major. On our, we give them decentralized information that's easy to access. Like I fell and cut my arm yesterday. I didn't go to the doctor because I didn't want to pay like 300 ringgit for some random cream, right? But this could lead to like really bad consequences in a place where people don't go by virtue of it being too expensive. If we can give them the information, they can know that it's either not important, so they don't go, which is great, or that it could lead to something and they should see a doctor. We tell you that comes better on our side. How do we solve these problems? We just allow for more subjective medical education reference, and we just lower the financial cost, right? Exclusivity here is that there'll be more retrofitted guides, different independent nations having different medical guides to better help doctors to access like symptoms. The impact and weighing here is simple. On impact, the ceiling for harm is extremely high. On our side, when we show you, on their side, when we show you the problems of neglect, and also on scale, we say minorities, yes, but this happens around the world, therefore the scale is amplified. I'll take a PI before I move on, if there is. Open, closing, yeah, go on.
Even if on opposition side, we don't have enough information, if you're really feeling very bad, why will you not seek doctor and get proper treatment on our side?
My whole point is, even if doctors are benevolent, even if minorities go see the doctors aren't equipped to help them. There are even cases of doctors saying that black people take more pain than white people, right? And they're fine with it, and they just get neglected. It's not for the lack of them wanting to help, they just cannot help when all the information comes in the reference of a white person. Second argument then, about how we prevent big pharma exploiting vulnerable people. Why is this important? We tell the principle here, a simple panel. There is a large power imbalance because of the necessity of medication to access like your autonomy in life. There is no opt-out of it, and there's a natural monopoly that comes from only large players being able to manufacture medicine. This is why it's so like medication is so pernicious in our society. Okay, problem is status quo. First, really quickly, overcharging for medication. Even OO themselves said pharmacies sell you drugs that make them the most money. There is a profit incentive here. We tell just really quickly, if the demand goes down because people are more aware of the medications they need and do not need, shift left in demand, prices fall. Don't buy that. The second argument here is the one that is the crux. Sorry, the second point is the crux of the second argument. This like incentivizing doctors, right? Big pharma is exploiting sick people. It incentivizes doctors to prescribe like more unnecessary but addictive medication. This looks like painkillers, which like my partner pointed out in the PR has led to like 500,000 people like being addicted to opioids, even though like opioids are banned in our world. Medications like painkillers act as a gateway drug into this, and this is very like harmful, right? Second, we tell them medications deal with the symptoms, not the cause, because it makes these companies more money. How do we solve it? We force medical prices down on the first due to econs, but second, peer review systems only come under our side, right? We let people decide differently, and we have other peers reviewing all the medications, whether it's necessary or not, how much it should cost. And then we have better call-out culture in this scenario because peer reviews can now call people out only when peer review systems are the norm now. The exclusivity here is simple, right? Peer review is only effective when it's done collectively, when people recognize these independent sources of information as legitimate, and that's how we call out big pharma. That's how we give you positive change under our side. Only through peer review do we get the benefits here. The impact is simple, right? On a scale, it's large. First, the future has so many people and we just make it better for them. And on the impact, our impact is large. We just make it so much more accessible for people to not make bad choices. Justice for minorities, taking agency back from Big Pharma. This is why we back to propose Go CG.
All right, I'd like to thank that speaker for what was a very fine speech, and now I'd like to call upon the opposition member. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Right. POI is in the chat. Preferred gender pronouns. I'll accept a POI in 4-6. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. The fundamental mistake of government's case was that they presume the world that they have to defend and the benefits that they were analyzing exist in a world where the status quo is. So things like reading about your symptoms, for example, and researching about your own symptoms are things that are not exclusive to the world of government, because obviously what they have to defend is an increasing decentralization of healthcare instead of depending on the status quo in trying to analyze their benefits. So all those articles by the doctors would still exist on the outside of the house. And that means then if the issue in this debate is about whether or not someone, when they are seeing a doctor, knows enough about their symptoms to tell that doctor about those symptoms, those things are not exclusive to Gov. The second thing here is that when it comes to general drugs, for example, like paracetamol or any headache or fever drugs, for example, would still be over the counter on the outside of the house because that is the status quo. Obviously, we can't say and revert back in history where those drugs are sold in these pharmacies. So those things are still accessible towards individuals on the ground, even on the outside of the house. So the large majority of individuals who are likely going to be persuaded by a decentralized healthcare system are things like for things that are perhaps within recent times, for example, like COVID, when it comes to having a lack of information about those diseases. As we've seen in status quo, there's a huge campaign of misinformation fueled by conspiracy theories that have allowed for individuals to be coerced to not opt into vaccination, for example, and ending up dying as a result of that, or taking like horse medicines, for example, that also harms their body under the world of government. We would say that those things get worse, way worse in the world of government at the point where there's a move to decentralized healthcare and to move past the advices of doctors and really seeing a doctor when it comes to talking about your symptoms. I'll talk a bit more about that later on. So let's deal with closing government first. They told you that healthcare for minorities in status quo are often largely harmful because often they don't have the information, the necessary information to know about the symptoms, given that different symptoms exist throughout different racial lines. I would just like to say here that the very same doctors, like in the model of opening government, who would co-write this particular article would still exist on your side of the house. So if there is ever some level of misinformation when it comes to medical knowledge towards minorities, then those similar advice would still exist, and those harmful advice would still exist in the world of government. But secondly, there are existing checks and balance mechanisms in status quo that allows us to call out on doctors who perhaps have misdiagnosed a minority just because they are of a different skin color, for example. They can literally cancel those clinics or those doctors on social media and to boycott those clinics under our side of the house. And those mechanisms still exist. Or they can get independent advice from another doctor, for example, to be able to get treatment that they deserve on the outside of the house. So it's not as if there's no doctor at all in status quo that would give them that particular healthcare treatment on the outside of the house. But secondly, it's also the fact that there's continuously increasingly more research towards medical treatments for minorities in status quo that exists already. So what government bench needs to do then is to explain why all of these things are not enough. But let's look at what opening said. They told you, well, you know, now people just can't afford healthcare, and that's why a decentralized healthcare system is good. Presumably, if we're talking about developing countries, the very same poor individuals that you talk about would still be unable to access the healthcare that you want to talk about. So if it's some medical website, for example, if these are the kind of people who are truly poor as characterized by opening government, then these are largely less educated individuals who would be unable to understand the articles that you're talking about anyways on your side of the house. And the treatments that are going to be provided will still be expensive for this specific group of individuals, even in the world of government. But also, there's no meaningful access to healthcare on their side of the house at a point where even if they were to get sick, they would refuse to see a doctor because of the encouragement when it comes to distrusting science and distrusting doctors on their side of the house. the rest of my rebuttals will be integrated, right? Why is it that there's going to be an influx of misinformation that harms more people? Let's first deal with the context. We think that there's an existing doubt that's fueled by conspiracy theories, as mentioned by opening government to some extent. And this happens on both sides. I would just like to note here that opening opposition's case suffers greatly because of the inability to engage with this. How would we differentiate ourselves from OO then? So first, I'll analyze why it gets worse and why these campaigns of misinformation gets way, way worse in the world of government. The first is that you legitimize the distrust to science, right? So when we're talking about these conspiracy theories against COVID vaccinations, for example, all of these movements are fueled by non-scientific beliefs that are easy to be bought by the large majority of individuals who are uneducated or are less educated in status quo. But these individuals, once they see the move to decentralized healthcare and to no longer see a doctor to talk about your symptoms, for example, all of this means that they can access healthcare somewhere else, and that then opens up room for all of these conspiracy theories to permeate within the circles of these individuals and to then allow for misinformation to persist in the world of government. But secondly, there's also lesser ability to correct misinformation, right? Because the motion presumes that there's going to be increased decentralization of healthcare that government has to deal with, which means that there's more and more individuals not seeing a doctor to seek medical advice on their side of the house. So that means there's no real professional that can tell you, no, that's just wrong information and you might get harm if you take horse medicine for COVID. Before that, sure.
Look, we gave you analysis on why decentralization necessarily leads to more reliable and accessible medical journalism that cater to financial and racial minorities. This was done before CG's extension. Crucially, this means that even if horse medicine was so over-the-counter, individuals are better able to discern whether it's suitable.
Right. I'll deal with that just very quickly. Okay, as I've said and framed earlier on, when it comes to research, that's not exclusive to your side. But even if that is true, at the point where people solely rely on their own diligence when it comes to researching about their symptoms, it's highly likely that obviously it's not going to be correct, right? Even if we were to presume that the articles are accurate in nature. So if that is the case, then it's highly likely that you're going to see the doctor a bit too late to the point where they would suffer huge consequences from that. Maybe the website just says it's a normal headache and you can take some essential oil for that, but in reality, that's cancer. And if you don't see a doctor, you can never know that it's cancer anyway. So that's the specific harm that you have to deal with. But lastly, even if we were to bite the bullet and answer the fact that there's going to be less access on the outside of the house because of the expenses that healthcare brings, we think that we would rather err on the side of caution because we're literally talking about the literal lives of individuals in status quo. We don't want to gamble on the lives of these individuals, hoping that the articles will be accurate, hoping that there's not going to be any misinformation, because we think that the best measure for those individuals to get the best kind of treatment for themselves and for their ailments are to see a doctor, and that's the only way that they get it fixed anyways. For all those reasons, proud to propose.
All right, I'd like to thank that speaker for what was a very fine speech. Now I'd like to call upon the government whip. You're here.
Hello, can you see and hear me?
Yeah.
I'll take POIs in the chat. If I don't respond by 5 minutes, just unmute yourselves. Preferably opening. Okay, I'll start my speech in 3. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, I'll deal with the responses that we got to Jadon's case, because again, I believe that Jadon's case was the most substantive thing in this debate. Firstly, they said there are existing checks and balances within the system. Understand also that they never said that anything that we said was false. So I can assume that the argument we made about BMI being used against Black women and Asian women, either to put them as overweight or put them as underweight, when they actually aren't, still happens within society. Because it does happen within society. If any of you have been to the doctor, you know that they still check your BMI, even when it does not apply to you, and it's not localized and specialized towards your certain race. We say that it just shows that the checks and balances do not even work enough within society. Because every check and balance you give, that you can cancel these individuals and whatever it is, requires you to have some sort of alternate source of information. And the fact that it hasn't been cancelled, quote unquote, enough means that the alternate sources of information are either not enough in quantity or not strong enough for people to use them as to hedge their beliefs onto. So we say that if you say that this is status quo and you need to defend and increase decentralization, yes, we do, because that's the only way that your safeguards and checks and balances that you give can actually manifest into actually protecting these individuals the way that Jadon argued, the way you did not contest. And secondly, you said these doctors that are bad still exist. Yeah, I mean, we didn't argue that these doctors are malevolent or benevolent. We said that they simply may not understand the exact cases when they should or should not use the BMI. They may not understand the exact cases where they should or should not treat a certain disease for a certain race. But the existence of decentralization, meaning the existence of people peer reviewing things within the medical scene itself, brings forth like more alternate views to things. It brings forth the idea that maybe what we are doing is wrong. Maybe it's based on white people alone. Maybe when we have these decentralized studies that are likely going to be niche and likely going to be localized to a certain race more than what you have in status quo, you can get these benefits that probably protect these women and these minorities even more. Because it's not enough for you to say like, okay, we are moving towards protecting them because we haven't fully protected them. That isn't a place for you to just be negligent and say, we've done enough. It's tokenistic. Closing opposition is tokenistic. Thirdly, they said there's already change. I already dealt with this as to why the change is not enough. But they also deal with lack of understanding. And I think it's really basic why the understanding is something that's likely okay to have on our side, because like I can learn about these things on TikTok and it's not so unverified in the sense that they actually cite their sources through their TikTok links and link trees like that. If I really bothered to check their site, the sources, and I wanted to, I could make sure that it's verified by some true source. But also I think OG does this when they explain that people can understand these things, but the impact of them understanding this knowledge from OG was just they go to the doctor, but not that now they are wary of the doctor, maybe not really regarding the specific issues that are going to affect them, or maybe not really understanding that the doctor might overprescribe them a certain medicine, because we are dealing with the fundamental problem of centralization, the centralization of any power, and that is that there is a power imbalance towards this individual. And I think when OO wants to talk about the most vulnerable actor, as they phrase it, we need to understand that because there's this power imbalance, they don't have the capacity to meaningfully use their own agency. That is to say, if you want to make sure that they can use their own agency, they must have some sort of alternate sources of information so that they can understand and make their own rational choices as to what they should be wary about. Because when we talk about horse medicine, ivermectin, it was ridiculed all over the news. And the reason why this is important is because it shows that people generally are skeptical. They are skeptical of big pharma, like you said, in conspiracy theories, something that we actually reduce when big pharma decreases, because the whole reason they are conspiracy theories is because they are so big in the first place. If they were decentralized, why would you want a conspiracy theory against them? But secondly, it shows that people will also likely be skeptical against the things that they read online, because for the same reasons that CO and OO outline, it's likely that these people understand that there might be some sort of perverse information as well. They are likely going to be wary. But what they do know now is there is a chance that there are things that doctors do that might be against their interest, whether they are benevolent or not. At least they know that information. We believe that these individuals are likely going to be able to make a rational choice there. What is CO's win condition? I don't really think they did much other than rehash OO and try and build their analysis. They talk about conspiracy theories. I already proved to you why it is wrong. They say legitimizing anti-science, but the only thing they're legitimizing is anti-authority and allowing people to question authority, which is something that's important insofar as we showed you how the opioid epidemic actually happened from the overprescription of these like painkillers. And my partner said the statistic wrong. It wasn't 500,000 people who were harmed. It was 500,000 people who have died. And we think this is something that's extremely impactful insofar as the huge power imbalance against this individual and making them subscribe to these addictive drugs even when they didn't even need it in the first place, and something that you do simply for profit, which OO itself concedes is bad and CO cannot knife. We say this is us winning on OO's ground as well. CO is out of this debate. What about OG? OG's whole debate was we help ill people. Yeah, I think the whole impact that they actually got to at the end of the day was some people go and see the doctor. Although that is like, yeah, I guess that's a net good. It is not important enough to like regulate, to necessitate the increasing decentralization of information. And CO is right in pointing out that OG is flawed here. But we give you the fundamental force of centralization by saying that it causes this power imbalance, meaning that these vulnerable individuals cannot fight back against the system or cannot even be wary enough to make a meaningful choice and just subscribe to whatever it is that the doctor says. We say this is harmful, even if the doctor is benevolent, because they might not have most of the information, but also because they get kickbacks from big pharma who just want to make profit and really don't care about people. At the end of the day, I'll take opening opposition.
So we proved today that individuals are prevented from seeking medication, and not just doctors, because of stigmatization in the first place. So even if on your side, you have the ability to notice that doctors have bias, what is the impact if people are not able to go in the first place?
Yeah, okay, let me deal with the impacts we get from opening opposition. First thing we hear from LO is insurance goes down, no financial incentives or analysis as to why. I seriously don't know why this is an impact in the debate. But also governments care less because less people go to the hospital. I think the government just have an obligation to care about making sure hospitals are accessible to people. I don't think they'll just suddenly, people are not going, we don't have to give a shit. No analysis here as well. I don't think that these things can fly at the end of the day. They talk about alternative sources of healthcare info, but never tell us what these sources are, and also say that they'll follow the doctors anyway. I don't see this manifesting. They just say people can never learn online. I think this is just unlikely because of all the things that OG themselves say. But in terms of mental illness, all you say is because society tells them that this isn't something that they should believe in. But I think the fact is, when they have these sources of information online where things are anonymous and people are more likely to talk about mental illness in the first place, it is likely then only that they realize that they do have a problem when it comes to mental illness outside of what society says, because society doesn't even know that you're going to doctor most of the time. The doctor isn't going to tell people, oh my God, Jadon is here for seeking mental treatment. I don't see how this impact manifests at the end of the day. And you didn't respond to both of the PIs that we gave you. Back to opening government. A lot of what they said can still happen with centralized systems. They weren't really comparative. We deal with why centralization in and of itself is a harm that we have to deal with. All they told you is that blogs can be written by doctors as well, but never proved to the impact of those blogs is that people are now going to be wary of what it is that the doctors say, and now going to understand to the full extent what it is that they have to do as a patient and be able to make a meaningful choice at the end of the day. We are the ones that protect vulnerable communities. Proud to propose.
All right, I'd like to thank that speaker for that fine speech, and now I'd like to call upon the opposition whip. You're here.
Hi, am I audible and visible?
Yeah, you are.
All right. Similar to Jadon, I'll take POIs from the opening just for the sake of engagement, but if they don't have one, then I'll just take one from closing. All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I have 2 observations and 2 issues in this debate, but just to introduce my 2 issues into this debate panel, firstly, I'll introduce the issue of which side provides better information, and secondly, which side avoid doctors even more. But let's take a look at the observations that I get throughout the debate, right? The first observation is actors and individuals who are likely to, receive the benefits of just doing more research and get this medicine are very rational and good at cross-referencing a lot of information that they get. I'm not too sure as to how good these individuals are, considering that doctors literally spend significantly amount of their life just studying medicine so that they can give the best alternative. But I'll later prove to you on later why most of the time individuals who buy into any form of references they get online are not necessarily going to be true. The second observation I have is in regards to just the trade-off. I think opening government and closing government wants to just take every single benefit that they get. I think closing government is a little bit more charitable, but they forgot to weigh out all of the trade-offs that exist in terms of just number one, how lesser people are going to adopt to doctors, but also secondly, what is the propensity for the misinformation to spread like a wildfire even more when you do make this research more available. But the third observation, which is really weird, is at one point, they characterize doctors as overcharging morally bankrupt individuals, and they just don't care about patients, they just want money. But at some later point, when they see that they have all the information that they need, then they want to approach doctors because these are the good individuals that's going to treat them. I'm unsure as to which characterizing best fits them, but if it's the former, then I'm pretty sure my speaker's arguments are going to manifest even more when people just don't trust science and just don't trust doctors at the end of the day. Let's take a look at the first issue on which side provides better information. OG and CG both contend the same thing. They say that a lot of people are just lacking of information and expertise, as well as just the expenses to actually live off good healthcare. But CG added a little bit more analysis by saying that how certain doctors just lack the expertise and somehow individuals have better expertise than doctors. The problems with OG's case is, first and foremost, just because you have wider availability, it doesn't mean it's cheaper. In status quo, you basically answered my POI by saying that you can't go to the doctors because you're poor, but somehow now when you have better statistics and papers, you can afford to. I think it doesn't make sense. But the second problem here is, if the main problem is the lack of information, on scale, it's much better for you to go to doctors because A, they're more experienced, but also B, individuals are limited individuals are just limited human beings with limited time. And this is to flag out all the characterization on how actors are just oftentimes irrational, right? Meaning to say, these normal average individuals are more likely going to go through 1 to 2 articles that best fit their search. I think the second speaker from OG also said that whenever they get sick, that's the point where they are going to do that research. So in that limited capacity of time is where they're going to do their research at the end of the day. Meaning to say, the propensity for them to actually come across a bad paper for them to see whether their disease is bad or not is going to be high as well, because they're not the same individuals who are going to become counter narratives. The comparative is doctors are the ones who are supposed to be acting as the counter narratives because they go through several studies constantly all the time. It's not that they just go through 1 to 2 studies and become biased to it. They read papers all the time to ensure that they get the best like medical advice they can give to their own like patients at the end of the day, right? So if people think that their disease is just not that serious, then they're likely to just not go to doctors at all. The extra problem that exists in CG is because they say that how doctors have certain limitation of expertise. For example, Asian BMIs are different from BMIs from like, I don't know, maybe other white people, right? My main question is, why is it so that doctors cannot adopt the same research where the patient supposedly have a more expertise on, right? I think if, let's say, for example, an Asian person is wanting to discover more about BMIs, I think you can just approach to another Asian doctor, which also has some form of expertise within their own regions and their own expertise at the end of the day, right? So meaning to say here, panel, is that research papers are always going to be produced and they are always going to be rebutted. That's just the nature of peer review that exists. Even without government's main method, peer reviews are still going to exist on the outside of the house. Before I take POIs, what I'm going to do now is just give you a scale of the trade-offs that exist within this first issue. The problem with the side of government is that if people are just poor, they lack the expertise, the education, as well as just the money to actually get better access to healthcare. This means that the propensity for them to buy into bad research paper is going to be even worse. So now the burden of cross-referencing articles shouldn't be on the hands of the average reasonable person, but it should be on the hands of expertise that studies on these matters even more. These are the same individuals that are going to give better advices towards these individuals at the end of the day. Our trade-off is probably maybe like, I don't know, going to the doctor is going to be much more expensive. It's not going to be as available, but I guess it's still better because you get the authenticity factor from doctors themselves when they actually give advice on the medical diseases that they have. Before I move on, sure.
We give you the mechanism of why minorities are structurally locked out, often financially, and why also journalist narratives are more diverse. No, I don't even know why from CG we care about the minority over the majority. That's more people.
Okay, first and foremost, if you want to make medicine cheaper, you don't decentralize it. You, I don't know, maybe give universal healthcare, you give cheaper insurance for individuals. It's not necessarily true that you have to make it decentralized for it to become cheaper. But I would argue if you, for some reason, are able to defeat the lobbying companies that make medicine is more expensive under your side of the house, I think we can have it as well, because this refers to the matter of financial issues with people accessing healthcare at the end of the day. The main contention is just information, not the access to it. The second issue here is which side avoid doctors even more. What my speaker contended in this issue is that first and foremost, when you go with the method coming from government, you legitimizes the distrust in science, but secondly, you have the lesser ability to have correct information because you opt out of doctors, because you think that the research that you have right now is just already enough. But buying into their logic, if they are poor and a lot of medicines are just very expensive, then the research paper that suggests that they don't have to seek for medical treatment becomes an extra reason why they won't get into medical treatments in the first place. But to further impact my speaker's points, is now the alternative like medical sectors would now attempt to market themselves to consumers even more to move away from science, precisely because you make them distrust in science in the first place. What CG contends on this issue is this big burden of just calling out against big pharma and taking them down. 3 problems to this. First and foremost, this ideology actually further exacerbates distrust towards science when it comes to average individuals just reading his articles. But secondly, even if there are capabilities to call out big pharma within their own research papers, right, I think we can adopt them too, because the motion says that the popularity of research is going to be increased even more, not the adoption. Meaning, even information is going to be likely to be accessible on the outside of the house. But the last problem here is that now pharma companies are likely to market their products even more within those research papers because they know individuals are going to rely on research papers as compared to going to their own doctors. If you want to give good medicine, go with side opposition.
All right, I'd like to thank that speaker for what was a very fine speech, and I'd like to thank you all for the debate as a whole. We are now going to adjudicate, so I'd like to ask you all to please leave this breakout room, and we will call you back in about 15 to 20 minutes when we have the decision. Thank you.
Everyone.
Let's see. Janel, yeah, if you could just review your notes, and then we'll start talking in a minute or so.
All right, got it.